Hi guys, we're back for our next session of reading with Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and today we're going to be reading chapter 14 and also chapter 15. Chapter 14 is called Mr. Willy Wonka, and I am now so very excited to read about this character that we've been hearing about so far. He's kind of mysterious, so I'm curious to see what he's all about. So if you'll join me, we'll go ahead and start with chapter 14, Mr. Willy Wonka. And it says, Mr. Wonka was standing all alone just inside the open gate to the factory. And what an extraordinary little man he was. He had a black top hat on his head. He wore a tailcoat made of a beautiful plum-colored velvet. His trousers were bottle green. His gloves were pearly gray. And in one hand he carried a fine gold-topped walking cane. Covering his chin, there was a small, neat, pointed black beard, a goatee, and his eyes. His eyes were the most marvelously bright. They seemed to be sparkling and twinkling at you all the time. The whole face, in fact, was alight with fun and laughter. Now, he sounds like somebody that I would like to meet. Let's continue reading. And oh, how clever he looked. How quick and sharp and full of life. He kept making quick, jerky little movements with his head, cocking it this way and that, and taking in everything with those bright, twinkling eyes. He was like a squirrel in the quickness of his movements, like a quick, clever old squirrel from the park. Suddenly, he did a funny little skipping dance in the snow, and he spread his arms wide, and he smiled at the 5 children who were clustered near the gates, and he called out, "Welcome, my little friends! Welcome to the factory!" His voice was high and fluty. "Will you come forward one at a time, please?" he called out, "and bring your parents. Then show me your golden ticket and give me your name. Who's first?" The big fat boy stepped up. "I'm Augustus Gloop," he said. "Augustus!" cried Mr. Wonka, seizing his hand and pumping it up and down with terrific force. "My dear boy, how good to see you. Delighted, charmed, overjoyed to have you with us. And these are your parents? How nice. Come in, come in. That's right. Step through the gates." Mr. Wonka was clearly just as excited as everybody else. "My name," said the next child to go forward, "is Veruca Salt." "My dear Veruca, how do you do? What a pleasure this is. You do have an interesting name, don't you? I always thought that a verruca was a sort of wart that you got on the sole of your foot. But I must be wrong, mustn't I? How pretty you look in that lovely mink coat. I'm so glad you could come. Dear me, this is going to be such an exciting day. I do hope you enjoy it. I'm sure you will. I know you will. Your father? How are you, Mr. Salt? And Mrs. Salt? Overjoyed to see you. Yes, the ticket is quite in order. Please go in." The next 2 children, Violet Beauregard and Mike TV, came forward to have their tickets examined, and then to have their arms practically pumped off their shoulders by the energetic Mr. Wonka. And last of all, a small, nervous voice whispered, "Charlie Bucket." "Charlie!" cried Mr. Wonka. "Well, well, well. So there you are. You're the one who found your ticket only yesterday, aren't you?" "Yes, yes. I read all about it in this morning's papers. Just in time, my dear boy. I'm so glad. So happy for you. And this? Your grandfather? Delighted to meet you, sir. Overjoyed, enraptured, enchanted. All right. Excellent. Is everybody in now? 5 children? Yes. Good. Now, will you please follow me? Our tour is about to begin. But do keep together. Please don't wander off by yourselves. I shouldn't like to lose any of you at this stage of the proceedings. Oh dear me, no. Now that's interesting. Could that be a little bit of foreshadowing possibly? All right, let's go ahead and keep reading. Charlie glanced back over his shoulder and saw the great iron entrance gates slowly closing behind him. The crowds on the outside were still pushing and shouting. Charlie took a look at them. Then, as the gates closed with a clang, all sight of the outside world disappeared. "Here we are," cried Mr. Wonka, trotting along in front of the group. "Through this big red door, please. That's right. It's nice and warm inside. I have to keep it warm inside the factory because of the workers. My workers are used to an extremely hot climate. They can't stand the cold. They'd perish if they went outdoors in this weather. They'd freeze to death." "But who are these workers?" asked Augustus Gloop. "All in good time, my dear boy," said Mr. Wonka, smiling at Augustus. "Be patient. You shall see everything as we go along. Are all of you inside? Good. Would you mind closing the door? Thank you." Charlie Bucket found himself standing in a long corridor that stretched away in front of him as far as he could see. The corridor was so wide that a car could easily have been driven along it. The walls were pale pink. The lighting was soft and pleasant. "How lovely and warm," whispered Charlie. "I know. And what a marvelous smell," answered Grandpa Joe, taking a long, deep sniff. All the most wonderful smells in the world seemed to be mixed up in the air around them. The smell of roasting coffee and burnt sugar and melting chocolate and mint and violets and crushed hazelnuts and apple blossom and caramel and lemon peel. And far away in the distance, from the heart of the great factory, came a muffled roar of energy as though some monstrous gigantic machine were spinning its wheels at breakneck speed. "Now this, my dear children," said Mr. Wonka, raising his voice above the noise, "this is the main corridor. Will you please hang your coats and hats on those pegs over there and then follow me? That's the way. Good. Everyone ready? Come on then, here we go." He trotted off rapidly down the corridor with the tails of his plum-colored velvet coat flapping behind him, and the visitors all hurried after him. It was quite a large party of people, when you came to think of it. There were 9 grown-ups and 5 children, 14 in all. So you can imagine there was a great deal of pushing and shoving as they hustled and bustled down the passage, trying to keep up with the swift little figure in front of them. "Come on," cried Mr. Wonka. "Get a move on, please. We'll never get round today if you dawdle like this." Now, that's an interesting choice of words there. He said, "We'll never get round today if you dawdle like this." Now think about that. He doesn't want them to dawdle, and he is moving quickly. So what he's saying is, I need you guys to get a move on. We have to move fast. You can't move slow today if we're going to get to everything I want you to see. All right, let's keep reading. Soon, he turned right off the main corridor into another slightly narrower passage. Then he turned left, then left again, then right, then left, then right, then right, then left. The place was like a gigantic rabbit warren, with passages leading this way and that in every direction. "Don't you let go of my hand, Charlie," whispered Grandpa Joe. "Notice how all these passages are sloping downwards," called out Mr. Wonka. "We are now going underground. All the most important rooms in my factory are deep down below the surface." "Why is that?" somebody asked. "There wouldn't be nearly enough space for them up on top," answered Mr. Wonka. "These rooms we are going to see are enormous. They're larger than football fields. No building in the world will be big enough to house them. But down here, underneath the ground, I've got all the space that I want. There's no limit, so long as I hollow it out." Mr. Wonka turned right. He turned left. He turned right again. The passages were sloping steeper and steeper downhill now. Then suddenly, Mr. Wonka stopped. In front of him, there was a shiny metal door. The party crowded round. On the door, in large letters, it said, "The Chocolate Room." Now, let's stop for a minute. We're going to continue on with Chapter 15, The Chocolate Room. And I cannot wait to see what a room looks like that would be called a chocolate room, because chocolate is one of my most favorites. So let's go ahead and keep on reading Chapter 15, The Chocolate Room. All right. "An important room this," cried Mr. Wonka, taking a bunch of keys from his pocket and slipping one into the keyhole of the door. "This is the nerve center of the whole factory, the heart of the whole business, and so beautiful. I insist upon my rooms being beautiful. I can't abide ugliness in factories. In we go then, but do be careful, my dear children. Don't lose your heads. Don't get overexcited. Keep very calm." Mr. Wonka opened the door. 5 children and 9 grown-ups pushed their ways in. And oh, what an amazing sight it was that now met their eyes. They were looking down upon a lovely valley. There were green meadows on either side of the valley, and along the bottom of it there flowed a great brown river. What is more, there was a tremendous waterfall halfway along the river, a steep cliff over which the water curled and rolled in a solid sheet, and then went crashing down into a boiling, churning whirlpool of froth and spray. Now that's really good imagery there when you think about this chocolate river that they're describing. All right, let's continue on. Below the waterfall, and this was the most astonishing sight of all, a whole mass of enormous glass pipes were dangling down into the river from somewhere high up in the ceiling. They really were enormous, those pipes. There must have been a dozen of them at least, and they were sucking up the brownish muddy water from the river and carrying it away to goodness knows where. And because they were made of glass, you could see the liquid flowing and bubbling along inside them, and above the noise of the waterfall, you could hear the never-ending sucking sound of the pipes as they did their work. Graceful trees and bushes were growing along the river banks, weeping willows and alders and tall clumps of rhododendrons with their pink and red and mauve blossoms. In the meadows there were thousands of buttercups. "There!" cried Mr. Wonka, dancing up and down and pointing his gold-topped cane at the great brown river. "It's all chocolate. Every drop of that river is hot melted chocolate of the finest quality. The very finest quality. There's enough chocolate in there to fill every bathtub in the entire country, and all the swimming pools as well. Isn't it terrific? And just look at my pipes. They suck up the chocolate and carry it away to all the other rooms in the factory where it's needed. Thousands of gallons an hour, my dear children. Thousands and thousands of gallons." The children and their parents were too flabbergasted to speak. They were staggered. They were dumbfounded. They were bewildered and dazzled. They were completely bowled over by the hugeness of the whole thing. They simply stood and stared. Now, I love the vocabulary that Roald Dahl uses in that paragraph that we just read. Flabbergasted, staggered, dumbfounded, bewildered, dazzled. He could have just said they were really shocked, but he chose to use that very interesting vocabulary instead. All right, let's keep reading. "The waterfall is most important," Mr. Wonka went on. "It mixes the chocolate. It churns it up. It pounds it and beats it. It makes it light and frothy. No other factory in the world mixes its chocolate by waterfall. But it's the only way to do it properly. The only way. And, do you like my trees?" he cried, pointing with his stick. "And my lovely bushes? Don't you think they look pretty? I told you I hated ugliness, and of course, they are all eatable. All made of something different and delicious. And do you like my meadows? Do you like my grass and my buttercups? The grass you are standing on, my dear little ones, is made of a new kind of soft, minty sugar that I've just invented. I call it swudge. Try a blade, please do. It's delectable." Automatically, everybody bent down and picked one blade of grass. Everybody, that is, except Augustus Gloop, who took a big handful. And Violet Beauregard, before tasting her blade of grass, took the piece of world record-breaking chewing gum out of her mouth and stuck it carefully behind her ear. "Isn't it wonderful?" whispered Charlie. "Hasn't it got a wonderful taste, Grandpa?" "I could eat the whole field," said Grandpa Joe, grinning with delight. "I could go around on all fours like a cow and eat every blade of grass in the field." "Try a buttercup," cried Mr. Wonka. "They're even nicer." Suddenly, the air was filled with screams of excitement. The screams came from Veruca's Salt. She was pointing frantically to the other side of the river. "Look!" she screamed. "Look over there!" "What is it?" "He's moving. He's walking. It's a little person. It's a little man. Down there below the waterfall." Everybody stopped picking buttercups and stared across the river. "She's right, Grandpa," cried Charlie. "It is a little man. Can you see him?" "I see him, Charlie," said Grandpa Joe excitedly. And now everybody started shouting at once. "There's two of them." "My gosh, so there is." "There's more than two. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What are they doing? Where do they come from? Who are they?" Children and parents alike rushed down to the edge of the river to get a closer look. "Aren't they fantastic? No higher than my knee. Their skin is almost black." "So it is." "You know what I think, Grandpa?" cried Charlie. "I think Mr. Wonka has made them himself out of chocolate." The tiny men, they were no larger than medium-sized dolls, had stopped what they were doing, and now they were staring back across the river at the visitors. One of them pointed towards the children and then whispered something to the other 4, and all 5 of them burst into peals of laughter. "Are they really made of chocolate, Mr. Wonka?" Charlie asked. "Chocolate!" cried Mr. Wonka. "Nonsense. They are real people. They are some of my workers." "That's impossible," said Mike TV. "There are no people in the world as small as that." Now, we're going to stop here at the end of chapter 15. And I find it very interesting because I think one of our mysteries has been solved. When they talked about those shadows behind the windows in the factory, I think we've now discovered who those little shadows might have been. They were Mr. Wonka's workers. So the next time we read together, we're going to pick up with chapter 16 called the Oompa Loompas. And I can't wait to get into this next chapter together. Until we read again, you guys stay safe, stay healthy. We miss you and we love you. Mrs. Wingo.